Wir, die Stiftung Mercator, wurden 1996 von der Familie Schmidt gegründet und mit großen finanziellen Mitteln ausgestattet. Die Familie Schmidt hat über Generationen hinweg ihre unternehmerischen Aktivitäten, vor allem im Groß- und Einzelhandel, aus Duisburg im Ruhrgebiet heraus betrieben. Aus diesem Grund sind wir nach dem Duisburger Kartografen und Kosmographen Gerhard Mercator benannt. Deshalb befindet sich unser Sitz auch im Ruhrgebiet, in Essen. Auch wenn wir uns inzwischen international, in Europa und ganz Deutschland engagieren, dem Ruhrgebiet fühlen wir uns immer noch besonders verbunden. Das Fundament unserer Arbeit sind immer unsere Werte, die unser Leitbild beschreiben. Bildung und Chancengleichheit, sozialer Zusammenhalt, das geeinte Europa, Toleranz und Weltoffenheit, die Förderung von Wissenschaft und Forschung sowie der Schutz der natürlichen Lebensgrundlagen. Welches die drängendsten gesellschaftlichen Themen sind, die unser Engagement verdienen, muss immer wieder neu ausgehandelt werden. Wir schauen, wo es Lücken und Defizite gibt, in denen wir uns sinnvoll einbringen können. Die Welt und ihre Herausforderungen verändern sich und so müssen auch wir uns mit ihr verändern. Wir entwickeln eigene Projekte, Partnergesellschaften, fördern ProjektpartnerInnen und kooperieren dabei mit Institutionen im In- und Ausland. Seit unserer Gründung 1996 haben wir rund 1700 Projekte auf den Weg gebracht. Dafür konnten wir rund 800 Millionen Euro einsetzen. Geförderte, Kofinanzierende und unser Team von derzeit rund 100 Menschen sind PartnerInnen bei der Problemlösung. Wir wollen unsere Arbeit auf eine pragmatische, inspirierende und überparteiliche Weise angehen. Gemeinsam geteiltes Wissen ist für uns die Grundlage des Wandels in einer pluralen Gesellschaft zum Besseren. Heute arbeiten wir in 4 miteinander verbundenen Bereichen daran, gesellschaftlich nützliche Veränderungen mit herbeizuführen. Digitalisierte Gesellschaft, Klimaschutz, Europa in der Welt sowie Teilhabe und Zusammenhalt. Wir sind ein Ort der Pluralität, ein Ort unterschiedlichster Haltungen, Erfahrungen und Kompetenzen. Mit einem divers aufgestellten Team und somit unterschiedlichen Perspektiven auf unsere Themen gewinnt unsere Arbeit an Qualität und Glaubwürdigkeit. Uns gibt es seit einem Vierteljahrhundert. 25 Jahre, in denen sich die Welt grundlegend verändert hat. 25 Jahre, in denen wir uns immer wieder verändert haben.
Liebe Gäste, liebe Freundinnen und Freunde der Stiftung Mercator, ich freue mich sehr, Sie heute zu einem weiteren Mercator-Salon in Essen begrüßen zu dürfen. Das Thema ist heute Europe versus Big Tech. Wege zu Europas Souveränität im digitalen Zeitalter. Und dazu begrüßen wir Francesca Bria und Luis Klamroth. Mein Name ist Wolfgang Rohe, ich bin Vorsitzender der Geschäftsführung der Stiftung. In diesem zweiten Jubiläumssalon anlässlich unseres 25-jährigen Geburtstags, wenn man so sagen darf, in der Stiftung werden wir uns heute dem digitalen Wandel zuwenden. Der digitale Wandel ist eine der zentralen Herausforderungen, sowohl für unsere individuellen Lebenswelten wie für unsere politische Zukunft. Wir wollen dieses Thema heute in einer vor allen Dingen europäischen Perspektive angehen. Und es scheint uns immer wieder so, als sei Europa gewissermaßen eingeklemmt zwischen auf der einen Seite einer auf absolute Herrschaft ausgerichteten digitalen Variante in China und einer sehr stark auf die Plattformökonomie der großen Tech-Giganten in den USA. Ein unkomfortabler Platz, könnte man so sagen. Und dennoch ist, glaube ich, die europäische Ebene, ist die europäische Gemeinsamkeit die einzige Möglichkeit, Werte wie Freiheit, Selbstbestimmung, Privatheit langfristig zu erhalten. Die Wege dahin, das ist das Thema der heutigen Diskussion. Die Digitalisierung ist also auch ein europäisches Thema und es nimmt damit Ziele auf, die wir in unserem Themenschwerpunkt Europa in der Welt verfolgen, wo es um die Zusammenarbeit, den Zusammenhalt und die Rechtsstaatlichkeit in Europa ebenso geht wie die Außenbeziehungen Europas zur Welt, vor allen Dingen auch zu unseren Partnerländern in der Türkei, die Türkei und China. Wir freuen uns sehr, heute gewonnen zu haben für die Diskussion Francesca Bria. Sie ist eine der führenden Expertinnen auf diesem Thema Digitalität und Europa. Und mit ihr diskutieren wird Luis Klamroth, den ich ebenso herzlich begrüße. Luis Klamroth ist Journalist und Moderator, Gründer der Diskussionsplattform Diskutier mit mir. Und er moderiert für diejenigen, die häufiger unsere Gäste sind, auch häufiger unsere Salons, was wir immer sehr genießen. Schön, dass Sie auch heute wieder dabei sind, Herr Klamroth. Ich wünsche uns allen einen informativen und einen kurzweiligen Salon.
Yeah, a very warm welcome from me as well, and welcome to the special Mercator Salon titled Europe versus Big Tech, Paths to European Sovereignty in the Digital Era. This Mercator Salon is a special one. It's part of a series of talks to celebrate the Foundation's 25th year of existence. And these discussions deal with the big questions in society and those questions that the Mercator Foundation is dealing with on a daily basis. And one of those questions, of course, is Europe, its values, and Europe in a digital age. While the US and the Chinese companies seem to be on the path to dominate the digital world around the globe, the question arises, what could and should Europe's role be in this race? Will Europe further fall behind and choose either the Chinese techno-authoritarianism or the US model of surveillance capitalism? Or is there maybe a third way that could lead Europe to be a champion of equal opportunities, human rights, etc. In the digital era? And those questions we will be discussing today with someone who is a globally known expert in the field, and of course she's a true European as well. I'm very happy to have Francesca Bria with me today. She's the president of the Italian National Innovation Fund. She's a member of the European Bauhaus High-Level Roundtable. She's an honorary professor at UCL. She is a member of the European Commission High-Level Expert Group on Economic and Societal Impact of Research and Innovation. These are just a few positions she holds. I could go on and on, but most importantly, Francesca Bria advises numerous governmental and non-governmental bodies and is at the forefront of shaping public discourse on digitization. I'm very pleased to have her with us today. And hello, Francesca, good to have you.
Hi, it's great to be there with you, celebrating the 25th anniversary of Mercator.
And we are going to have a discussion, of course, but the people at home that are using the app, that are watching our live stream right now, are more than welcome to ask questions. And you can ask questions in either English, oder Sie können auch Fragen auf Deutsch in den Chat schreiben und ich übersetze sie dann. So please feel free to just ask anything you want, and I'll try to discuss these questions then with Francesca. Francesca, I said you are, in all sense of the word, a true European. What does it mean to be a European in 2021?
Well, great question, actually. Yesterday, I was very close to where you are now. I was in Berlin. I was there with President Mattarella and President Steinmeier to celebrate a prize, a collaboration between Italy and Germany. And the prize went to collaboration amongst cities, small cities and bigger cities, to fight climate change and for sustainable digitization, culture and education. And I think for me, really, at the very core of being European is this question of making sure that we have strong political network that bring people together based on, democracy, sustainability, and social rights and human rights, which is the idea that we have that Europe can be shaped by people from the bottom up. So I think at the very core of being European, for me, there is this very core question of what is democracy today.
Mm-hmm. And if you look at the past couple of years, on what people are, which governments people are electing all over Europe. Do you feel we are on the right track? Is Europe developing in a way that you feel is going the way that you just described your vision of a Europe?
Well, I think that we are now becoming more and more aware as citizens of Europe that we have to strengthen the European institutions, and that this means maybe to give away some of the national sovereignty, but also to strengthen popular sovereignty. So I believe in a Europe that has kind of stronger economic policy, social policy, a new geopolitical dimension, which also implies a new conversation about defense and about also solidarity when it comes to being European. But I think we need to revitalize democracy. So giving away part of our national sovereignty to strengthen European sovereignty doesn't mean to weaken popular sovereignty. So I think we have to, understand that we are shifting in a very new world, and that this has to imply that we are also strengthening the democratic institution of representation. And I think this has been very clear in the last years where we had the financial crisis, but then also the rise of populism or nationalism also in Europe, where I think the only alternative and solution to avoid populism and nationalism becoming again an issue here in Europe has been actually strengthening democratic participation of citizens throughout. And I think we're seeing that, for example, in one participatory democracy exercise that is happening at the moment in Europe that it's not very well known. So I think we need to mention it, which is the Conference on the Future of Europe, where hundreds of thousands of citizens are being consulted now on what are the future policies of the European Union, from the fight to climate change to the future of work and better salaries to democratic participation and to the future of education. So I think these are very important to start from communities and citizens, and to make sure that we manage the big transitions that we're facing, bringing people together and bringing communities together.
We'll dive into that in a little bit. We'll have to talk about cities, of course, but let's perhaps look at sovereignty for a second. How has the concept of sovereignty changed in the digital age?
Yeah, I think that my thesis is that Europe understands that today, when we talk about digital sovereignty, we also mean political and economic sovereignty. So you cannot have political and economic sovereignty without technological sovereignty. And because we have new threats in this hyper-technological 21st century. So in particular, I think we are learning as Europe that we cannot only be seen as a regulatory superpower, that this is not enough anymore. So Europe is very well known for proposing, let's say, almost a new constitution for the digital age, very strong regulations, new rules, very strong principles. But we also have to remain relevant as a global economic power through our technological innovation. And this means that competing on innovation for us should mean, first of all, putting forward our strength, principle, and values, and making sure that the digitization will be democratic and sustainable. So that, for instance, issues related to civil liberties, digital privacy, and data governance are given central importance. So you also mentioned it, I think, at the very beginning of our talk, that Europe Europe has a very historical chance to go beyond, these two models that we are facing for the digital age, that we have the US big tech model on one side and China's big state model on the other side. And Europe should lead the way to a new kind of digital humanism or digital sovereignty that's combining innovation and dynamism, so making sure that we can compete on the front, but also with a strong defense of our autonomy, democracy, sustainability, which also means, workers' rights, citizen rights, and the planet, which we have to take care, obviously.
But I wonder, But I wonder, Francesca, looking at the preeminence of US and Chinese companies, digital companies, tech companies globally, does Europe even have the slightest chance of catching up?
Yeah, I think we have actually an historical opportunity not only to catch up, but to propose our own path towards the digital future. And we can do that by combining an ambitious regulation on one side with digital industrial strategy. I think it was very clear during the pandemic that we need to reduce our dependency, for example, on imported raw material, electronic components such as microchips, and we have to make sure that Europe can retake control of its destiny. We do have a very big opportunity now with the 2 trillion euros plan to recover for COVID-19. I mean, this is very important. The European countries are coming together and mutualizing their debt with a common direction for the economic growth and for the industrial strategy of Europe. And we have around 20% of the COVID recovery and resilient facility, around 400 billions in Europe that will be spent on critical technologies, infrastructure, ultra broadband networks, 5G, quantum computing, artificial intelligence, microchips, and cybersecurity. I think we need, it is clear that we need to, as I said before, on one side, continue with what we are doing at a regulatory level. So we all agree that we have bold interventions coming up with the Digital Market Act and the Digital Governance Act in order to strengthen policies related to antitrust and competition. So, for example, antitrust is becoming very important because we see that the market dominance of big tech companies in the digital age is reaching unprecedented peaks. But we also have issues such as, digital taxation, a minimum corporate tax, and fight, for instance, precarization of labor in the gig economy, because we are transforming the economy in many different economic sectors. So when it comes to, I think, regulation, even a specific European focus to open source technology markets, data portability and data sharing, privacy-preserving standards and privacy-preserving protocols, algorithmic transparency, for example, and accountability. These are all very good, and they all show a specific European way to innovation. I think what we really need to strengthen is our industrial and innovation strategy. So we say too little, I think, that Europe needs to grow its technological and scientific capacity. We need to create European digital champions that can compete in platform-based digitization. And we need to take back the control of our technological stack. So European technology that are made in Europe and that are made with different, principle and standards in mind. For example, privacy-preserving protocols and data portability and data sovereignty.
But Francesca, if I may, that all sounds wonderful, and thinking about having sort of European tech giants, platforms that sort of based on our values, all that sounds wonderful. But I wonder, thinking about the tyranny of convenience, looking at the software that comes from the Chinese market, the US market, programs that are easy to use, that are fun to use, that make life simple and easy. And then we of course have alternatives. You tweeted that a couple of weeks ago as well. There are alternatives that protect our data and so on, but they are of course not convenient to use. So is it really realistic to compete one day with Facebook, TikTok, Amazon, and these platforms that have made our lives in some aspects much more convenient?
Well, I think we are seeing also the negative externalities of a business model of the digital platform that's based on the manipulation and monetization of personal information and data. I think what has been described as surveillance capitalism is a business model that has created a new form of algorithmic power that has been and is endangering the Habermasian public sphere, which is the core of our, liberal democracy that we live in. And I think when we have been facing, and we're facing daily questions around fake news and conspiracy theories and hate speech online and the polarization of public opinion, or even, data leakages during elections and the manipulation of personal information and data, we are seeing the other side of what you call convenience, which is at the very core of the business model of the digital age. I think we can change that. We can shift. Actually, we have changed it when it comes to regulation, because we have something like the data protection regulations, which says that, we have fundamental rights and, data sovereignty and data protection, but also information self-determination are fundamental rights of citizens. And we should develop a digital society that protects our fundamental rights. So this is actually a matter, for example, of investing. I mean, not only of good regulation, but also how this regulation is implemented, which means, for example, that we can invest in privacy-enhancing technology and protocol, which makes cryptography easy for the people, which makes, now we have this cookies directive. Yeah. And as citizens, all the time that we want to control what happens to our data, it's very complicated. We do not understand the terms and conditions. These are our rights to data, which is very important because data is the raw material of the digital economy. And our collective rights to data is very important. With data, we can transform our society for the better. So we need to regain democratic control. And it's not okay to have technologies that are designed to violate those principles. We should have convenience that makes privacy and information self-determination easier. And so that's the type of technology that we want to build in Europe, which doesn't mean that we do not want to exploit the economic and social power of artificial intelligence and data to transform our society for the better. So as you can understand, my perspective is constructive. Of course, we do want to lead the digital transformation. We don't want to be afraid of it.
Of course, and I love your optimistic take on it. That you're obviously optimistic that people are willing to sort of consider alternatives, and how to get there we'll discuss in a second. But I'd like to stay with you for a second. And talk about the US model of what you call surveillance capitalism. I wonder how you evaluate and look at what is happening in the US right now. It's been mostly the far right that has been pushing this sort of anti-big tech narrative during the last election cycle. But from my perspective, it seems that this narrative has now taken over quite a majority of all lawmakers in the US, not at least because of the whistleblower Frances Haugen, who has leaked internal compromising Facebook data. Is this the beginning of the end for the US model of surveillance capitalism, perhaps, that we're witnessing right now?
I don't know if this is only this that you were citing at the moment. I think there are years that we are seeing the negative effect of such business models, and also we are very concerned about the concentration of power. I mean, market power, and we in the digital economy. And we have to say that the dominance of the big tech has increased during the pandemic. I do not want to make it a question of the US versus China only, but if you look at what happened in the digital market during the pandemic, is that we as population started to use much more digital platforms. I think we had a really fast spreading of digital technologies throughout the population because of smart working, distance education, a 20% increase of the use of e-commerce and food delivery platform, video conferencing, contact tracing applications. So the digitization of our healthcare system is also speeding up. And while the rest of the economy was in a recession, losing money and firing people, and we had to intervene with massive recovery plan and public funding and also unemployment benefit to avoid that, the big tech increased their market power and they increased their revenues. And now, their market capitalization is around $9 trillion combined, which is more than the entire capitalization of the entire European stock market. So we do have a problem there. And I think this is very clear also in the US with the antitrust committee and all the investigations that are going on, also looking at mergers and acquisitions, looking at, export control and try to govern more this digital economy. So I think we are at a point that we recognize that something must be done. And I don't see it only in the US, but I see it also in China. Actually, the Chinese government is cracking down on their own monopolies and try to understand, what are smarter way on one side to have a better competitive environment, so to have fair competition, but also to protect the data of citizens for national security concerns, but also for really democratic concerns. And at least in Europe, this kind of democratic approach is much stronger than in the US and in China. So I see that we see this question of, regaining the kind of rights and civil liberties and the fundamental freedoms of citizens as a very central part of why we must redefine the business model of the digital age. So I think we are concerned about a lot of those risks, from monopoly power to the need to tax the digital giants, to civil liberties, to rights of workers in the gig economy. We see all these challenges. These are very central to our the future of politics. And that's why, those issues don't have to be understood as some kind of tech policy that doesn't have, that's not central to the political debate. I think we need to help to explain citizens the importance of the digital issues and the political importance of the digital issues as fundamental to redefine the rules of the game, of the economy, and of our societies of
Francesca,
the future.
Is it really?
One problem here is that people maybe don't understand fully, the importance of the debating these issues, beside maybe privacy or beside, the need to regulate social media. And I think there are many more issues that are very important for citizens, and we should be able to explain this and to make sure that the politicians also understand how.
That's what I was wondering, Francesca. Is it really the citizens that don't understand it, or is it perhaps an issue that Brussels and lawmakers in Brussels have just not recognized yet as an important core issue? Where has the work to be done?
Yeah, I think on both sides. I think the reason why I like so much to start from cities, and I think that cities have a central importance to how we redefine, this technology agenda for the future, is that in the city, data becomes a kind of very concrete question. So it's not only about cryptography and privacy and about open protocols and standards. These are things that technology experts care about, and of course we need to make sure that technology experts and privacy and security researchers are involved and also can work with policymakers when decisions are taken. But I think for the majority of the citizens, what matters is how those platforms are influencing, for example, affordable housing and, the price of their rent, how this is impacting the future of work and the right of, to have labor rights and a decent salary in the future, and, job dislocation and the transformation of the labor market vis-a-vis technological automation is a very important topic. They care about the fight against climate change. And so they want to see how, this technology can help us to reduce the CO2 emission and to decarbonize the economy and make our cities greener, electric, shift to a better mobility.
But Francesca,
and how we can use technologies to increase democratic participation
If I may, because I don't think it's intuitive. How can you make it concrete? Maybe from your work in Barcelona, but what's the link, for example, between digitization in a city and CO2 emissions? Where's the link? I don't think it's intuitive for many people.
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously with connectivity, data and artificial intelligence today, you have the tools to monitor what's happening to the environment. So to measure what happens to, if we have more pollution, to account for CO2 emission, and also to track the consumption of energy and make sure that we are shifting towards more, renewable energy and the consumption of less energy. And that, when, for example, citizens are seeing the rise of the price of electricity or of heating in the winter, they know that they could have access to to the capacity to monitor that, and then governments can also intervene to fight energy poverty, for example. So there are a lot of things that need society to basically regain, let's say, the control of artificial intelligence, data, and connectivity for the public interest, to create public value. So at the moment, what is happening is that, of course, this data and these infrastructures are in the hands of very few private players, maybe 5 to 7 big tech companies that own the digital economy. So if they own the digital economy, the question is, can it work for all of us? And I think our task is to avoid to continue, that digital capitalism end up in a continuous concentration of market power, economic power, and social power. So this power and also this value that is created through the digital revolution should be redistributed and given back to the citizens that are producing this data and this knowledge in the first place. And, it's very easy, I think, to make examples. For example, now we have Airbnb, Uber, and lots of different platform businesses which are affecting housing and transportation and so on. If we have the capacity, for example, in cities to control these technologies and those infrastructures and platforms, and also to control the data, well, we can come up with, more distributed, sometimes publicly owned, sometimes privately provided services that can increase, the local value that is produced, and also allow competition for the smaller players and the startups or the smaller companies that now are cut out from this economic.
Just to make it concrete, Francesca, is. Let's talk about Airbnb, for example. Would you then say it needs to be regulated so that the data Airbnb is acquiring should sort of be open knowledge, should be available to all citizens in a city? And do I understand you correctly in that sense?
Well, this has become very clear for many cities around the world that the business model of this platform when it comes to short-term rentals and what's happening with, how Airbnb collects data and then uses their algorithms, affects the prices of the rents and affect the housing market prices. And so cities more and more had started to ask access to the data and the algorithms just to regulate the market. So, access to having accountable and algorithmic transparency and algorithmic accountability becomes a very important matter of regulation. If I have a black box, and I don't know what goes in and not what goes out, and how this data and then the algorithms affect the prices of the housing market and then the rent of people. As a city maker, I don't know anymore how to, policy maker, I don't know anymore how to regulate the market. So yes, increasingly, cities started to ask access to this data in order to come up with a smarter regulation for Airbnb or for Uber and for all those platforms. So I think algorithmic regulation also in the labor market is becoming increasingly a very important issue. And because, otherwise you will be fired by an algorithm, or your rights are increasingly depending on algorithms that we cannot really control because we cannot assess how they work and if they're based on discrimination or if there is, some discriminatory elements. And we cannot even, enforce collective bargaining when it comes to workers' rights, for example. So those issues are becoming increasingly important. So we need to let's say, be able to, have transparency and accountability in the use of algorithms and make sure that data, for example, can be considered a public good as together as artificial intelligence. For example, in cities, data can be considered as a public infrastructure, like water, like the air we breathe, like the roads, like electricity. And it's a meta utility on top of which we can create public value. For example, new data-driven or artificial intelligence-driven services that can help us to fight climate change, improve mobility, have better education, better healthcare, and so on. So we have to understand that this value belongs to society that creates this value, and that we need the rules that basically lead us to a digitization that's really sustainable, but also democratic, which means more inclusive and where the wealth is redistributed, but also that we can say, okay, we want to go in this direction. So we don't only want to accelerate digitization. I mean, this is going back to your question of convenience. We do not just want to accelerate it without, for example, saying as a society, we want technology to help us fight climate change, because this is the fundamental defining issue of our society. We want to create better jobs. We want to create affordable housing. We want to improve mobility. Those are the societal objectives that we have to set as a society. And then we have to govern technology in a democratic way in order to use the immense power of data, connectivity, artificial intelligence, quantum computing, to achieve those goals as a society, and to make sure that while doing that, we respect workers' rights, citizens' fundamental rights and liberties, and we set the agenda. Basically, we don't are like victims of this kind of technological transformation.
So what you're suggesting is quite radical, right? Because you're saying let's attack the core business model of some of these huge companies, and they're centered around, of course, an algorithm and data that is all of their value. And some of our viewers today, I think most of them probably agree with you. And someone, Hannes Hasenplatt, for example, is asking, how can the citizens of Europe finally gain sovereignty over their data? What must be their very first step?
Yeah, the very first step should be exactly this, gaining the sovereignty over the data. I've been betting on a model that's not, data is owned by the big tech or data is owned by the state. I think we have another option, which is data that's governed in a more democratic way with citizens' control over these data, where citizens can decide what data they want to keep private. And so we have to deploy and fund, privacy enhancing technology and better cryptography protocols, which are easy to use for people, such as, distributed ledger technology with strong cryptography that people are able to use to protect their data. Then what data they want to share, with whom they want to share with data, and on what terms. Okay. So we want to basically revert a model where data markets are opaque and we don't know who is accessing our data and for what purpose, towards a model where data is kept and as a common good, and data is shared in the favor of public interest. Okay. It is possible to, it is really possible to do that, but I just, it doesn't have to only, look like easy. There is, of course, questions around infrastructures. For example, we know that now we are strongly dependent on cloud providers that are non-European, that we are dependent when it comes to, the microchips, and we are dependent when it comes to, even now there is battle around 5G technologies and around artificial intelligence, of course. So I think I strongly welcome, actions that are now linked to what I said at the very beginning. Like, we have an opportunity with Next Generation EU to invest finally, because the European agenda on technological sovereignty is becoming stronger, to invest in those critical technologies of the future. So cloud computing, AI, cybersecurity, microchips, and so on. So, for example, one of the projects is Gaia X that you know in Germany, because, your government was, together with the French government, the first proponent of creating a European cloud where we have protocols for data sovereignty. So now what I think we should make sure is that this really builds the capabilities that are European capabilities to build open source, decentralized, privacy enhancing technology that are rights preserving. I think this is what we need to make sure that, we transition from the kind of dependency where we are now towards a model for European technological sovereignty, where we are more in control of the technology, so we can actually produce these technologies. Europe really has the capacity to do that.
And we have a couple of questions from our viewers that go exactly down that path. Walid Daoud, for example, asks, what should European tech companies exactly do in order to take over and surpass the monopoly of US and Chinese big tech companies and social media? And he adds another question. Are Russian companies like VK, OK.ru or RuTube, are those a model to follow?
Well, so what we should do is, I think, we should, first of all, be very clear that now is the time to put more emphasis in the need to grow this European technology, this technology made in Europe, and that we can take control over the technological stack, as I said before, so that we are able, as European companies, but also the public sector, to develop future critical services and applications in critical sectors such as energy, mobility, deep tech, and climate change. So we should not think that this is just about social media. We should build the kind of applications and services in these spaces, and this is now, we have now the possibility to do that. This also means that we should invest more in creating, for example, scale up. Deep tech startups should be scaling in Europe so that we can connect in a stronger way research centers and university via effective tech transfer. I think you do very well that in Germany with with your research centers like Fraunhofer, for example. And then it should be easier for tech innovators to scale up to pan-European and global level. So we obviously also miss access to capital, a larger EU-wide markets in risk-taking equity or VC. And then we have to make sure that the European single market and the pan-European regulatory regime work so that we can boost the demand for native tech products that can plug in local tax, labor, and licensing rules. Because I think this can be then the competitive advantage for European tech companies to scale, in this European single market with a pan-regulatory regime. So instead of fighting all the time because local taxes and the labor and the licensing rules, we can make sure that actually we have a market that's fully functioning. And I think that on top of that, I would also say that I would favor the development of democratic data governance model. So as I said before, like moving away this kind of surveillance capitalism based on purely monetization of data and data markets in favor, for example, of data trusts, where data, once anonymized, can be shared for the greater public good. So I think, these solutions that where data is fed into this unsustainable, privacy-violating business model of tech platform is no longer sustainable. And, if we show that it can be done differently, we also increase the trust of citizens in using this technology. Because imagine now we are digitalizing everything. I mean, also in the public sector, we're going to have digital ID, a digital euro, digital payment system, and the access of citizens to services will be mediated by digital application. So healthcare, mobility, education, we are digitalizing all these services. So we need to make sure that at the core of this digitization process, there is trust, and that this is governed in a democratic way. I think this is very important
because at the moment, all these services in most places are provided by private companies, right?
By private companies and by non-European private companies. So all the time that we come up with advanced regulation, it's very hard to enforce because, obviously we do not have our players. And so they play according to different standards and rules. So I think I think it's going to be very important to do that and to set the governance structures and also to develop the capabilities at the same time, because otherwise we will get in a situation where those companies are too big to regulate, too big to break, too big to govern, and we've already seen how that how that went in the financial system. We had a very big crisis, and nobody was able to actually fix the problem. Yeah. So this time we want to we are having this conversation because we want to fix the problem before. We don't just want to clean the mess after, and now we are always cleaning the mess after when we see the dead body. Just if you know what I mean.
Yeah, of course.
So we just want to reverse the situation.
I just want to make sure we have valid doubts question answered. Is the Russian way maybe a way to follow those Russian companies, VK, OK.ru? Is that perhaps a model that we should follow?
I think Europe should follow its own model. I mean, I'm saying this from the very beginning. We should not I think it's great to learn. Like, of course, we're learning a lot from, what's happening in Silicon Valley. We're collaborating with US companies. I mean, this is all great. We are learning also from to see what's happening in China. I mean, China is like catching up, is even going beyond the US when it comes to critical technologies and critical electronic components like microchips and AI, and also now starting to regulate their digital giants. So I think it is clear that we need to regain this capacity to build our technologies made in Europe, but following our model. I wouldn't continue to
building a European model. two people that are asking in the same direction. Hannes Hasenpatt and Dr. Rainer Lange are both interested in the data protection and perhaps speed. So do you see, Dr. Rainer Lange asks, do you see the risks that Europe might focus too much on data protection and neglect the need to become a leader in developing and using new technologies such as quantum computing in order to become truly sovereign in the digital realm?
I would like to see those things combined. I mean, this is my entire conversation, my entire discussion is that, of course, we need to lead, and we need to lead on, also on emerging technologies such as quantum, as it was rightly pointed out. But I think we want to do it on our own terms. And I think when it comes to privacy and information self-determination and data protection, we should be proud of our constitutional framework. This is really the strength of Europe, because this is, we are proposing a way where technology can be, our technological capability should be deployed, first of all, to tackle societal large, challenges, for example, climate change, affordable housing, better mobility, increased democracy. So really targeting, so digital for what? So we should target the big environmental and social challenges of our time. And at the same time, we want to develop technology, exploit the potential of emerging digital technologies, but fully protecting the fundamental rights of citizens, of workers, and safeguarding the planet. I mean, it sounds just good, but I think this is this is the European way to technological sovereignty. And even on top of that, as you know, I've been working a lot in cities, and I still work as kind of UN advisor, and I'm working now with the city of Hamburg, and I keep, consulting other cities on how to digitalize, because I believe that we should start where people are. So I think we will understand, and more it will be obvious for national governments and for the European Commission, how important it is to start from cities where citizens are. Because, this is where proximity happens. This is where trust should be formed. This is where we need to engage citizens in shaping the future of our society. So using, deploying technologies where citizens can fully participate. So digital democracy cannot just be seen as a kind of Facebook democracy, right? You click here and then you create all these problems because of the use of data, manipulation of data, as I said before, fake news, conspiracy theory. No, there is another way, to deploy technologies that fully involve citizens in decision-making and that help us to revitalize our democratic institutions. I think we should put these kind of democracy questions at the very core of how we want to develop the digital society.
Start with cities.
People first.
People first. Maybe let's talk about your work in Barcelona a little bit, and perhaps Hamburg as well, which is my hometown. So I'm interested in what's happening there. But how are those cities, especially Barcelona, I guess, because you've had a major impact there, but how are those cities governed differently in terms of data than other cities around the world?
No, I think that Barcelona is showing a way to data democracy, citizen participation, and putting technology at the service of people and improving, the city for the better. And we have been deploying the biggest European open source digital democracy platform. It's called Decidim Barcelona. I have to say I'm particularly proud that now this became the platform that the European Commission, the Council of Europe, and the European Parliament is using for the Conference on the Future of Europe. So now, hundreds of thousands of citizens are using this open source privacy enhancing technology and platform to, express their opinion, to debate, to prioritize what is the most important policies for the future of Europe. So this is not happening on Facebook. It's not happening on a commercial social media platform. It's happening on this technology, which is open source. So it's out there. The community itself is improving it. It is based on a protocol and standards that are open, that are accountable, where privacy is protected and where the data belong to the citizens themselves. And I think this is a kind of ethical model for the digital society, where technology also was built locally and managed to scale. So it is now used at a pan-European level, but also globally by over 80 cities and 20 countries. So it is a success, and we should say it and we should celebrate it. This is one. And then I think the other important experiment was done around the Decode project, where we exactly worked with this concept of data sovereignty and data control from citizens. And so we developed this cryptographic protocol and the decentralized data infrastructure that enables citizens to decide what data they wanted to keep private, what data they wanted to share, and with whom. So, for example, mobility data, you want to share it with the city, because you know that if you share that data, they can improve public transportation system. And actually, we should get private companies also to share this data, preserving privacy and preserving the fundamental rights of citizens, because then this data become a kind of public infrastructure on top of which we can improve the kind of mobility service of the city. So, we should basically, transition to a model where data just gets transferred in the hands of very few big tech companies, towards a model where data become this kind of public urban infrastructure that can be leveraged to create new services for everyone.
Okay,
that benefit all citizens.
That's the second step, of course. But we've talked about it a little bit. You said, regulate these companies in terms of forcing them to become more transparent with their data. Yeah. And Francesca Giardina asks, are Europe's regulation attempts or endeavors just a coping mechanism for its incapability to compete in the global market? If we can't participate, let's regulate?
No, I think that we should be holistic. We should understand that we need very strong and bold regulation. We need strong regulation. We need a bold digital industrial policy and digital industrial strategy, and we need investment. And then we need a strong democratic framework. We need all of these together. So I never thought that actually, for example, GDPR and the data protection regulation will be an obstacle to innovation. I think that it's enabling innovation. For example, it's enabling innovation in decentralized infrastructure, in privacy-enhancing technologies, in new cryptographic models, such as, we are seeing now a boom in big tech and cryptocurrency, also because these technologies have been developed. So actually we can bet on Europe's talent in building alternative type of infrastructures by leveraging our regulation. So I think our regulation can enable fair competition and better competition and not less competition. I think that the problem we have now is that we have very little competition in the digital economy. We actually have very strong oligopolies, and we have to control acquisitions. We have to control. Many governments now are doing even export control. I think also the German government has included AI and biotech in the companies that, are basically deserve critical attention because they are strategic. Yeah. And so we need to do export control, and we need to control acquisitions in these critical technology spaces. So it is obvious that the rules are changing. We have a new geopolitical dimension, and we need to be able to compete in a smart way. So Europe should combine the capacity to innovate, at a technological level, at the scientific level, to create technologies that's built in Europe, but also to have regulation which is setting, I think, the examples in the world. I mean, look, the data protection regulation has become the e-privacy standard across the world. Even the Chinese are now looking at Europe and try to emulate what we've been doing here. The same when it comes to antitrust and competition, same when it comes to digital taxation and the regulation of the gig economy. So I think we're actually doing a good job there.
We're doing a good job, and you've mentioned quite a few examples already, but Anne Dunker is asking, looking back over the last few years, what has been Europe's most important step towards greater European digital sovereignty and value-based transformation, and what perhaps has been the biggest opportunity? And I'll say one first, so you don't have to say it. Of course, what you've implemented in Barcelona with the participatory platforms that we are now using on a European level as well has perhaps been one of the big steps. But I'm sure there are others as well.
Well, thanks. Thanks for that. No, I think I don't want to sound too optimistic. I mean, my way of being optimistic is just a wake-up call. I think we have an historical opportunity right now. We actually have investments for the first time in many, many years that are going into digital industrial policy. We have the Microchip Act, we have the Data Governance Act, we have billions of investments in critical technologies. We cannot lose these opportunities to develop our technological capabilities at the moment. And that's why I'm stressing the need for having this digital sovereignty question much more central in national politics, but also at a European level. I think we should take this seriously because I think this will impact the future of Europe in the world and how we're going to be positioned in the strategic, value chains of the future, but also really in the model for the future societies that we're building. So I really believe that those questions are not for technology experts. They must become, something that gets much more debated in the political space, but also among citizens. So I think we have been late, obviously. So that's what we maybe, we lacked our maybe we didn't even trust in the capacity of Europe to propose its own way, for the future. But I mean, we did in the past. I mean, we obviously had a strong, otherwise we wouldn't have our, automotive industry. We wouldn't have like European trains. We wouldn't have European airplanes. We wouldn't have a lot of like our industrial capacity. So we believed in our industrial capacity before, and we should believe that getting digital right means to be able to have, to compete in the future to set the standards for the future economic models, which also should go hand in hand with the European social model.
And
this is what Europe is about.
Course. And the people that have to champion and sort of work on these European giants and the European way, of course, people that are now designers of technology, but they're also growing up. And Jan Wilker is rightfully asking, how could young people be better equipped with digital skills, becoming literate, critical users, and possibly future designers of a new technology made in Europe? And then Dr. Rainer Lange adds, rightfully so, but why only young people? How can anybody become a better equipped with digital skills that help us shape the European way?
Yeah, so they are already saying it. So this is what should happen. I think, I really believe that when we're talking about, ethical digital standards, open source technology, federated or distributed technological systems and so on, Europe have very strong capacity. We also have some of the best security and privacy and security experts. I mean, the majority of the time they work in European universities and research centers funded by European research investment money. And then, they many times go to work for US companies because they offer a lot of more money. And so I think one of the points is definitely how do we retain this talent here in Europe? How do we make sure that when we have strong talent when it comes to, computer science, security, AI, but also, it's broader than that, because I think we should be multidisciplinary. We should understand that, the future of technology is also integrating the economy, integrating ethics, integrating social science. So it's broader than just, learning how to code and learning the technical skills, but we should be able to retain the talent here. And then when it comes to digital skills and digital alphabetization, I think this is a matter of upgrading the education system. So we always have to think, for example, we have a very big gender gap, which is something we should fix absolutely, because we have less than 30% of women present in STEM. And I think this is from the primary school to the university, to the industry, to the research space. And this is something we really want to change. And then we have, digital divides that are territorial divides between the north and the south, between cities and countrysides, and also, be more inclusive when it comes to different socioeconomic backgrounds, racial backgrounds, and so on. So we need to make sure that this digital transition that has to go hand in hand with the ecological transition doesn't create more polarization, doesn't create more divides in Europe. And this is something that I think has to do also with how we frame the education and also how we train our workers for this transition. So we need also the unions on board. We need the workers' organizations on board.
You talk about a value-based transformation all the time, and these European values that need to be incorporated in digitization within Europe. But let me get back to what we talked about a little bit in the beginning of our conversation, where when you look at Europe and all of these different countries, as one can have the impression that currently Europe and perhaps the countries and the citizens of Europe are not all do not all agree on sort of a set basket of core values. Does that make it even more difficult to sort of make that big leap to compete in a global stage with the US and China and Russia, perhaps?
No, I think we have a much bigger divides. Also, if you look at the US, this is not, actually, I think that when it comes to Europe, you have different levels to answer to this question. I think we should strengthen the political Europe. I think actually what I talked about before, programs such as the Next Generation EU, but also the unemployment schemes that was put forward during the pandemic. Even the way that we came together for producing vaccines in Europe and the kind of effort that we have done jointly to improve the public healthcare system during the pandemic. I think now the big recovery plan that we're doing all together, these measures strengthen the European capacity to act together with common directions. Of course, we still have differences, and we still have some fundamental differences when it comes to, for example, not respecting some of the main European standards when it comes to liberal democracy, when it comes to an independent judiciary, when it comes to respecting those values. I think it's very important to be very firm and make sure that all the European countries are going to obey to these fundamental principles and values. And I think we should continue, of course, to work in this direction. But think about, for example, how young people, also with the possibility to study across Europe, so this kind of Erasmus programs, or the very strong cooperation that we have in education and research across Europe, even the cultural production that we have, the kind of public service broadcasts that are, very connected at the European level, the production of culture and festivals and arts. And, these all, I think, brings together the young Europeans much more than what we think. I mean, we actually travel a lot. We used to exchange, we exchange a lot. We have the possibility to, we have a very integrated system when it comes to education, to research, to, to culture. And to even our historical and cultural heritage is very strong, I think, as Europe. So I'm also positive in this sense, because, I mean, me, myself, I'm the perfect European, as you said at the very beginning. Mm-hmm. I'm Italian, but I studied abroad. I studied in the UK. I also, worked in, in Brussels for many years. I, work all across Europe. I just all the time work at a kind of European level, and I think as me, many other people in Europe have the same opportunities. So I think there is a strong sense of being European in this way, and I think we have it more than other continents. So I don't think this diversity that we have in Europe is an obstacle. I think it's an added value.
That you are, of course, the perfect example of a European, and it's good to hear that there are more of you out there, Francesca. But
definitely, yes.
Is there? Because of course there are, like you said, there are a lot of differences in between the countries. There are some countries that are not respecting some of the fundamental rights at the moment, or at least their governments are not. But you also argue, and I found this very, very interesting. You also argue and suggest that digital sovereignty should also be at the heart of Europe's foreign policy. And I wonder if you could elaborate on that and explain that, because it might be counterintuitive to some. How is digital sovereignty connected to foreign policy?
Yeah. So this is a very important question. I think we can start again thinking from the kind of pandemic moment, when I think this emergency has taught us that it's not possible to tackle global problems with local solutions only. And I think this was clear with the production of vaccines, but also how we understood in Europe, not only that we had to procure vaccine together and build more capacity to produce the vaccines in Europe, but also that we had to provide the vaccine and possibly provide it openly to all other countries, in particular countries in the global south. I think this emergency taught us that multilateralism is making a comeback, and we need this kind of strategic interdependence more and more. And this is also obviously very important in the kind of geopolitical space, and also looking at the situation in Afghanistan and in many other conflict areas. And so I think as a lesson, we can see that at the same time, Europe should be a very important player in this interdependence and multilateralism, which we kind of rediscovered, I think, very strongly in the pandemic. But at the same time, Europe must strengthen its strategic autonomy as a bloc, as we are debating now, from our defense to technological and scientific capabilities, but also the role of the euro in this digital scenario, to be perceived as a smart power, to be perceived as, one of the big players out there that can set, the standards of the future. And so I think that Europe and like-minded democratic partners have a chance to chart a progressive path for the digital society. So this means acting at international level when it comes to, for example, binding international regulation that could follow Europe path on regulating the digital economy, for example, on antitrust or taxation or digital privacy, democratic and AI governance, cybersecurity and sustainability. And I think we are seeing some of those issues being discussed, for example, in the EU and US Trade and Technology Councils that has been meeting the last month. And more, this kind of policies becoming central in the international arena. I mean, look at the kind of G20 finance ministers agreeing on a minimum corporate tax and on a kind of framework for taxation that would include also the digital giants and so on, and everything else that I mentioned. So I think that this digital dimension is becoming central to also our foreign policy, and that we should champion this approach to multilateralism also in this space, but at the same time strengthening our capacity to act as a bloc. I think those elements for me are as important.
Okay.
And not fall into this kind of US-China tech wall.
Okay.
I think we should refuse this kind of new Cold War scenario. I think Europe is important also for that, not fall into this, into the fact that this technological supremacy for the future is just a new Cold War between the US and China, which is played with new kind of rules, from 5G to export control to banning technology from the adversaries to just, I think the approach that I highlighted could be also at a diplomatic and international level, something that Europe could contribute to.
And Valid Doubt suggests or asks, are or could the existing European tech companies settle in other countries and on other continents with their own strategies and democratic principles? Are there any examples of sort of European tech companies that are...
There are many European tech companies. Now, I don't want to mention any in particular, but yes. And also if you look... I think also here I want to stress our capacity to do it differently, because I think on the kind of startup and scale-up scene, Europe is really getting much more traction. We are growing technologies companies in deep tech, in many areas, actually in biotech, in space technology. We are really growing our capacity, and we are having also more foreign investment. We are having more VC investment in Europe, and I think we are creating much more opportunities for digital companies to scale up. At the same time, I think Europe is not only that, and we can put forward a model, for example, for digitization of the public sector that's truly innovative, where we can have some of those infrastructures, for example, data and maybe the digital payment and the digital ID becoming public enabling infrastructure that can be built in an open source model with ethical digital standards and with security and ethics and privacy by design. This can be done and should be interoperable and should be used across Europe. I think we should have this as a target, because now many countries are deploying, as we speak, their digital ID systems and also their digital payment system. And there is, as you know, because of also a reaction to the kind of cryptocurrency booming, there is central banks are thinking about, what to do there, how to regulate the digital money system. And so we have the opportunity to set a digital euro that will preserve, for example, the privacy and protect the data of European citizens and integrate this enabling technology in a pan-European ways, so that we can have, small companies then compete on top of this enabling infrastructure to create better services. And then we need also the big industry, of course. So it's not only the startups. I mean, the startups should integrate also with the capabilities of our big industrial players in Europe, because, one way, for example, to exit for a startup, it can be being acquired by a big industry or integrating the technologies. So it's like a new way to do open innovation, which is basically, incorporating technologies that come out of our research centers via tech transfer that is effective. and that, can innovate our industrial ecosystem in Europe, in critical sectors.
Francesca, maybe one last question from our viewers. Carla Husted is asking, Big Tech is investing great sums in lobbying in Brussels. Civil society is worried that the regulation that is currently discussed in Europe, DSA, DMA, AI Act, might be watered down. Do you share that concern?
Yeah, I think I saw a report that tells us that the tech industry spent more than 97 million annually on lobbying the EU. I think 97 million euros, if I'm not wrong. I think this is a great sum. I think it's maybe unprecedented. And I think when we see with the data protection regulation, this has been the most lobbied regulation in the history of the European Union. I mean, it sounds, it is concerning. So I think we should not let this happen. I think we should regulate that. We should demand transparency and accountability from our democratic institutions, and we should make sure that our lawmakers and our policymakers and our regulators can do their job. And we need to do that promptly. I mean, I think also this question for me, it's very important because we always kind of put regulation as kind of stifling innovation, as kind of opposite to innovation. And I don't believe this is the case. We need smart regulation to innovate and to protect citizens' rights and to protect fair competition and to protect, and to enable even new forms of markets to emerge, to shape markets. So I think we have to have a positive view of regulation, of course, the right one. the bad regulation, we just want to change it or get it out the way. But I think we should not water down like this kind of regulatory frameworks that are needed in order to put forward those kind of changes that we want to see. So, yeah, we need to monitor the lobbying power of big tech, of course.
Francesca, thank you so much for this enthusiastic talk about value-based transformation and digitization in Europe. And thank you for being with us today. I think you're a great example of a great European. I've said this before, and I hope your work, especially looking at what is happening in Brussels right now, and what is discussed there.
Well, we are all looking at what's happening in Germany right now, because you have to form a new government, and hopefully what we are debating now will be also, debated and be part of the coalition agreement and be very much, central to what the German government will do, because Europe needs Germany also very strong on those topics, of course. So we're also looking at you and making sure that technology, will be a right and an opportunity for all citizens and not just for a privileged few. So we want to make sure that we really seize this opportunity for all Europeans.
I'm sure your words are heard in the discussions in Berlin right now. Thank you so much, Francesca. And thank you so much to all the viewers and the great questions you've had. There is a big fat feedback button in your app, which we'd appreciate if you give us feedback so that we can improve on these talks. Thank you so much, and stay here for a little bit because Dr. Rohr will talk to you in a couple of seconds. Thank you so much for joining us today.
What an energizing discussion. Thank you very much. I'd like to thank first of all, of course, Francesca Bria for fighting for European sovereignty in the digital era. But I also like to say thank you to Louis Klamroth for fighting for his sovereignty as a moderator, which was quite successful. It was a great discussion. Thank you very much. Und das letzte Wort gilt dem nächsten Salon. Wir setzen unsere Reihe fort und bleiben im Thema Digitalisierung. In der nächsten Woche am Montag, dem 18. ist dann unser Gast Gilles Lepore, die amerikanische Historikerin. Und wir werden einen eher historischen Blick auf das Thema Digitalisierung und KI werfen. Zu dem Salon wird auch Julika Griem hinzukommen, die Direktorin des Kulturwissenschaftlichen Instituts, sodass Louis Klamroth das heute Gelernte gleich anwenden kann in der Diskussion mit 2 Intellektuellen. Wir freuen uns sehr auf den Abend. Ich darf Sie alle herzlich dazu auch einladen. Der wird allerdings erst um 19 Uhr beginnen. Das ist abweichend von den anderen Salons. Gilles Lepore konnte nicht anders gewonnen werden. Also 19 Uhr bis 20:30 Uhr am nächsten Montag. Vielen Dank für Ihr Interesse und auf bald.
Vor uns liegen große Herausforderungen. Wir werden auch in Zukunft optimistisch daran arbeiten. Wir sind der Stifterfamilie für das anhaltende Vertrauen und die Unterstützung dankbar. Wir danken auch allen, die unsere Arbeit möglich und wirkungsvoll machen. Unserem Beirat, unseren PartnerInnen und unseren KollegInnen in Essen, Berlin, Peking und Istanbul. Gemeinsam treten wir ein für Weltoffenheit, Solidarität und Chancengleichheit.